It's my Nerd World, a Star Wars show. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. Will Disney ever sell off Star Wars? I'll talk a little bit about Bad Batch, Episode 13, Into the Breach, a very brief Andor Season 2 update, and The Acolyte, the next live-action Star Wars Disney Plus streaming show to feature the best lightsaber battle. I'll share with you what I think are some of the best lightsaber battles. It's all subjective and it's all for fun. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. As always, if you want to support my Nerd World, go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and check out the science fiction space opera series. I'll give you more details a little bit later on in this week's episode.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
And welcome to it, a Star Wars show. I'm your host, Jon Justice. If you want to email me at any point throughout this week's episode, if it so moves you, you can do that. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Or if you happen to be on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment, and I'll share those back on next week's episode. When it comes to Star Wars, for me as a fan, and I think for a lot of fans, the rewatchability of Star Wars is what makes it special. The ability that Star Wars has to go and to take us to a completely different place outside of our real-world, day-to-day woes and issues of being an adult, while still making it relatable. Whether we were kids, when I was a kid watching VHS copies, bootlegs for a while of The Empire Strikes Back before getting an official VHS copy, and then as you get older and you move past that onto the DVDs and the Blu-rays, for so much Star Wars content, it's the rewatchability of Star Wars that I love so much. It doesn't get old. Now, I can't say that for a lot of the recent Star Wars content, and I think that's more just of a byproduct of having so much more Star Wars content than we ever had when we were growing up. I never thought that I would utter the words, and I've said this before, of Star Wars fatigue, but alas, here we are. And this is relevant to something I'll talk about a little bit later on in the episode, specifically relating to Andor and why I personally don't find Andor rewatchable, even though I've tried. And there's a very specific, in my opinion, reason for that. Now, the flip side is the reason why I have found the Ahsoka series to be so rewatchable. The Ahsoka series is the first live-action series, apart from The Mandalorian, but even more so with the Ahsoka series, that I find myself gravitating back towards. Whenever a new Star Wars movie would come out, and I would eventually get a copy of it, on physical media at home, most likely as of late of Blu-rays, ever since the release of The Force Awakens. All of those movies, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, those are all rewatchables for me. I love all three of those films, and I'll rewatch them over and over again. I can't say the same for the Kenobi series. I can't say the same for Book of Boba Fett. I may try to revisit them, and I have in the past. I've done some rewatches of The Mandalorian, even though I had some issues with Season 3. When it comes to Ahsoka, though, Ahsoka really is meeting the level of rewatchable that I would typically go and associate with one of the films, even the Solo movie. And for me, I think it's largely in part due to Dave Filoni. And the fact that Dave Filoni was trained by George Lucas, the guy who created Star Wars. His love, his respect for Star Wars, it shows in all of those episodes of Ahsoka. It's a problem that we have in a lot of IPs as of late. And again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I'm bookending the podcast a bit. I'll talk a little bit more about this. And that is a lot of content creators that aren't being respectful to what came before. So, as I jump into this week's episode, and it's kind of a bit of your tease that I'll talk about a little bit later on, I want to start here, though, with a Forbes article that came out discussing Disney's profits relating to the Star Wars films.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Box office profits generated by Disney's Star Wars movies have fallen $2.8 billion short of covering the media giant's purchase of the sci-fi saga's creator, Lucasfilm, according to analysis of recently filed financial statements. Now, this Forbes article goes into great detail into the amount of money spent on the films, the box office return, the amount of money that was spent on merchandising and promotion. And when you break it all down, based off of the amount of money that Lucasfilm purchased, or that Disney purchased Lucasfilm from George Lucas, they still have yet to recoup all of their dough. Now, it gets close when you start bringing into the mix some of the ancillary Star Wars stuff they've sold and merchandising and things like that. Certainly when you go and factor in the money that's been brought in from subscriptions to the Disney Plus streaming service based off of the Star Wars content that's been created there, I did find it rather shocking that Disney still had not gone and recouped their money. And it raises the question in my mind, and I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit lately. If Disney would ever go and sell Star Wars to another company. Now, that question might be dead in the water based off of contractual agreements that Lucasfilm may have had with Disney that they wouldn't go and sell Star Wars. I imagine if there's got to be a limitation on that in terms of how many years Disney has it. I guess a better way to formulate the question would be, would Disney be better served under a different corporation's hands? Would an Apple do a better job with Disney products? Would Paramount or Universal? I don't necessarily have an answer to those questions, except to say that Disney, as of late, has been getting competition on a number of different levels, whether it's content creation or whether it's their theme parks, that I thought would never, ever take place. And yet it's happening. Largely because of the decisions that Disney has made in hiring certain people and the agendas that have brought down the quality of content and the live experience that one gets when going and spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to spend a day or two at a Disney theme park. I would be really interested to one day see Star Wars and the franchise handed over to another company that perhaps might be more respectful and may handle it better than Disney has. There's been a lot of mistakes on the way, and I've mentioned before, I'm surprised that when it comes to Star Wars, the brand has been diluted the way that it has. Don't misunderstand, it's still profitable. I still love my Star Wars. I'm still doing the podcasts on a weekly basis. But for a franchise that was arguably the biggest franchise on the planet, and I think there's still an argument to say that it certainly isn't as valuable or as well respected as it used to be. As always, what are your thoughts? Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So let's talk a little bit about Bad Batch episode 13, Into the Breach. Listen, this was another adventure of the week. Wrecker, Hunter, Crosshair, this time reuniting again with Echo to try to go to find the directions to Tantus so they can rescue Omega and those other Force-sensitive children there on the planet. I love the moody themes that are used for Omega's time on Tantus. I enjoyed the episode overall. Again, it is another adventure of the week, but I've been enjoying every single episode. I don't think that it's lost its way in any way, shape, or form. When it comes to the Bad Batch, you kind of know what you're getting. We're not breaking any new ground. So far, there hasn't been any sort of major revelations to midichlorians, and I've mentioned before that this is an aspect of the storyline that I would like to see more of. I want to see more of these connections to the content that comes after it, whether it's in The Mandalorian or certainly the sequel, the sequel films. The one part of the show that I did want to talk about was the end of the episode. The tension building that made this episode this week completely worthwhile, in my opinion. I'm going to pull the end of an article breaking down the entirety of the episode from Star Wars Newsnet to talk a bit about the end of this week's episode. So spoilers here if you haven't watched episode 13, Into the Breach, yet. Echo sneaking into the hangar bay with the science vessel once it becomes clear that they have to nab the coordinates from a ship already scheduled to head for Tantus. This is all based off of Rampart, them capturing him telling him they're going to have to go to this orbital station outside of Coruscant because that's the only place where they can go and get the coordinates to go find Tantus, rather than sending them on their own again. Getting back to having Echo go in to the science vessel. He narrowly avoids the attention of a clone commando, infiltrates the ship via a Hoover funnel that sucks up the droids. I thought that was a nice little nod to A New Hope. I appreciated, the article writer says, the creativity on the show, an excellent example of what Echo brings to the team. I wish they would have shown this sort of thing back when he was on the team regularly, says the article writer. It would have helped differentiate him from Tech. I never personally had an issue with that, but, to each their own. The rest of the team rush back to their ship to exit the station, waiting for Echo to disable the ship's sensors so they can latch on their shuttle and join them in hyperspace. This was where the tension really ratcheted up, and for me as well, says the article writer, but I completely agree. As I started to wonder if only Echo was going to make the trip and they would have had to open the way for the other three in the next episode. Now, that doesn't happen, and the writer says it would have made for a more exciting cliffhanger if it had. I disagree, and I'll share that with you in a moment. He does manage to deactivate the sensors right at the last moment, and the Bad Batch makes it just in time. The episode ends as they jump into hyperspace, with next week presumably seeing them going to Tantus. This wasn't a classic episode by any means, but it had some highs and moved the story along. That I agree with. It was really the tension in that moment, where they take off in the stolen Imperial ship, and they're trailing behind the science vessel, waiting for Echo to go and disable the sensors. Very much classic Star Wars, in my opinion, only to make it right at the last minute. And it really built up the tension for such a very short episode. And honestly, that moment made for the entire episode overall. It was a decent episode, adventure of the week, but that ending was a nice little chef's kiss, for lack of a better way of describing it. Only two episodes left in the Bad Batch, with Acolyte right around the corner. So looking forward to seeing how it wraps up. I think it's been a solid season. The Bad Batch is a show that I will probably revisit in its entirety at some point in time once we finish up with season 3. Not necessarily high on my list of going back to rewatch, as I mentioned at the start of the show, but still enjoyable nonetheless. And more than likely, I'd end up revisiting Bad Batch before, say, the Clone Wars series. All right, let's get to the next bit of content. And this comes from Slash Film. The Acolyte will include a lightsaber battle that could top Star Wars' best fights. Now, I got a big question mark over the Acolyte. I'm very curious to see how the show shapes up. I'm keeping my expectations well in check over a series that, when it was initially announced, I was incredibly excited for. But my excitement for the series has waned considerably when you look at some of the comments that have been made around it, when you look at how this has been under production for a long time, any changes that Bob Iger in his return as CEO that he might have done to remove some of the agenda from the Star Wars content probably didn't include the Acolyte since it was already in production. So in terms of the quality of the show and whether or not it's going to beat us over the head with agenda, that remains to be seen. Be that as it may, here's an article from Slash Film I thought was interesting enough to go and share with you. With a string of mysterious murders at its center, the Acolyte is set to be the Star Wars equivalent of detective fiction. Although the show's first trailer also makes it clear that it won't forfeit any action for the sake of its mysteries. That first look features a martial arts-inspired face-off, a force-fueled knife fight, and a forest showdown that begins with an ominous red saber cutting through the trees. According to series star Daphne Keane, who spoke with Entertainment Weekly about the new show earlier this month, the Acolyte isn't just trying to match the action sequences of past Star Wars shows, it's trying to beat them. Now, I know my take on what they consider to be the top lightsaber battle probably is not going to be a popular one. That being said, Daphne Keane says, in trying to beat the other lightsaber battles, it was very much, we want to top the Darth Maul fight. The most iconic fight, I think, in the Star Wars cinematic universe, Keane told Entertainment Weekly. There's a good reason the climactic Darth Maul battle is a reference point for the series. The Acolyte takes place about 100 years before Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, so Maul is chronologically one of the closest major villains in the show's timeline. It's such an amazing fight, and we were all so excited about lightsaber fights, Keane continued. There's such a skill and a craft to it that it feels so original Star Wars and feels so impressive when you see it as a viewer. The actor who was playing a Padawan named Jecki Leon in the series said that Maul's confrontation with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi was often mentioned as a comparison point during production. That was a very frequent conversation we had, Keane told the outlet. The first trailer features a fighter, possibly Amanda Stenberg's May, showing off her Wuxia-inspired aerial front flip that features a level of showmanship rarely seen in live action outside The Phantom Menace. The Darth Maul showdown was a comparison point during filming. Keane's Saber work was her favorite part of filming, and that the stunt team incorporated martial arts into the action. I loved the whole training process of it. Everyone was very excited about it, which then made it much more fun, she told Entertainment Weekly. Our incredible stunt team created this kind of fusion of different martial arts, and we were really trained in how to use the sabers. The actor added that she and her scene partners, Charlie Barnett and Lee Jung-jae, all feel comfortable with the sword now, after spending hours a day training with the stunt team. Plus, Keane implied that viewers can learn a lot about these new characters and their fighting styles. It was really kind of fun to explore, and also a different side to the characters within the fighting, she explained. I know that a lot of people point to the end of The Phantom Menace and that Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan fight as being one of the best Star Wars lightsaber fights. I don't consider it as such. I've watched all these movies more times than I can remember. The issue that I have with the lightsaber fight on Naboo in Theed between those three characters is that, unfortunately, it's way too choreographed. Now, I know they're all choreographed, but you can see it in the fight. Not the entirety of the fight, but when the fight first kicks off, you can tell Ewan McGregor is going through the motions and the way that his head is turning, the way that he's spinning. He's got body language that's occurring before it naturally would have, responding to Darth Maul and his attack on the two of them. There are moments in the fight that are absolutely spectacular, and specifically after, spoiler alert, Darth Maul cuts down Qui-Gon Jinn. There are moments at the opening of that battle, and I like that portion of the battle the most, just between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul, especially after Obi-Wan Kenobi goes and chops Maul's dual lightsaber in half. Unfortunately, I just find the choreography in it way too scripted, and it seems too obvious. For me, one of the best lightsaber fights of all the films is in The Rise of Skywalker. And the water fight with the waves crashing on the Death Star 2 between Kylo Ren and Rey. That lightsaber fight is absolutely spectacular. You've got an amazing backdrop taking place. You've got the element of water added into the mix. You have them both doing their flips, flying over the waves. The moves themselves, the force block, it's just top-notch. The lightsaber fight at the end of Attack of the Clones, I actually prefer between Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Dooku. I guess I should say Dooku, but Dooku versus Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin. I find that lightsaber battle to be one of my favorite of the prequel trilogy. All of the lightsaber battles in Ahsoka, I absolutely love. I think that's some of the best choreography and some of the best lightsaber work across the board, whether it's the battles taking place between Shin Hati, or whether it's the ones taking place with Ahsoka and Baylan Skoll, or just you have Sabine on her own using her lightsaber. I kind of find it a running gag, and I don't know if this was the case, but throughout all of the Ahsoka series, there's this moment where Sabine's fighting with her blasters, and I keep looking at the screen going, get your lightsaber, because once she pulls the lightsaber out, she ends up victorious in those battles. The only complaint that I do have with regard to Sabine in those battles is I do not like the blaster sound they chose for Sabine's guns. It's a little too real world-ish for me. It doesn't have enough laser. It has too much gun, in my opinion. Going back to the original trilogy, nothing to me in any of the films tops the fight between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader on Bespin in The Empire Strikes Back. To me, that's one of the absolute best ones. So, as always, curious to get your thoughts. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com.
This is not going to go the way you think.
And to wrap up the show this week, and I'll bookend the show with sort of ending the commentary that I started this week's episode with. This comes also from Star Wars Newsnet. Over the weekend, Tony Gilroy was presented with the Ian McClellan Hunter Award for Career Achievement during the Writers Guild of America Awards, honoring his lifelong dedication to storytelling and the organization. During the press junket following the ceremony, Gilroy had a few words to say about Andor, the Star Wars series he's currently in post-production on. So back up for Gilroy. He's been involved in films for a long, long time. He was tasked with coming in and straightening out the production on Rogue One, and a lot of the credit to the film that was created goes to Tony Gilroy for coming in and doing just that. In a video posted on social media by the WGA account, Gilroy said this relating to Andor and Andor Season 2. I've been on Andor for 5 years now. We're finishing the second half. I've had a lot of fun over the years, but I don't know whether I've ever been doing anything as important as these 24 hours of storytelling we're doing now. I don't know if it's because it's a thing I'm on, but I don't think so. I've never had a chance to work this big before. Now, the article writer for Star Wars Newsnet goes on to say, Gilroy is referring to Andor as a whole, meaning its 24-episode run, which we've now seen half of. The second half of Season 2 finished production earlier this year, should arrive on Disney Plus in 2025. It was severely affected by last year's strikes, which not only kept Gilroy off the set for 2 months, but eventually also closed up the whole thing a few weeks before they were able to wrap up. It was originally targeted for an August 2024 release. Now it's undetermined, even though, again, we expect it sometime on Disney Plus next year. Tony Gilroy famously said that he was not a fan of Star Wars or knew anything about Star Wars before he got involved. A bit of a trial by fire, and I'm sure he learned a lot on Rogue One that he ended up lending towards Andor. Now, Andor is a series that I very much enjoy, but getting back to my conversation in terms of rewatchability, honestly, the fun is completely stripped from Andor for me. I don't think that they're heavy-handed in any of their messaging, but the fact that at the end of Andor, the hologram speaking to the individuals on the planet before the last major confrontation, she originally said F the Empire, but they ended up cutting it. I think it speaks a lot to, again, the fun not being in the Andor series. Now, you could probably make a decent argument that there's not a lot of fun doing that thing with my fingers in Rogue One. That being said, there still is that sense of adventure that leads into the fun in Rogue One that you typically see in a Star Wars film. Andor's a great series, don't misunderstand. But for me, in terms of rewatchability, it's too serious for Star Wars without adding in that element of adventure and fun, even though it has some fun moments. right? It's much more of a drama to me than it was a Star Wars series. And it worked on that level, but it's not anything that I really need to go back and watch over and over again. It doesn't have enough elements of the action, and certainly doesn't have the Jedi aspect of it and the mythology of it to bring me back to watch it again as a rewatchable. There are portions that I will go back and rewatch, and certainly the space scenes involving that Fondor Hullcraft and the redesigned Star Destroyer, that's amazing, and I'll go back and watch those. But I think, again, it's partly because of Tony Gilroy not being a fan of Star Wars. I watched a montage recently, and it was a montage of writers and directors and content creators for Marvel specifically, talking about not knowing, being familiar with, or drawing from the source material. And it was used in a video where somebody was discussing, what's happened with the Marvel franchise, of which I am of the opinion, as are many, that it's really dropped off in quality. And unfortunately, I think that montage says a lot. A lot of individuals being brought in, not because they were fans of the material, maybe because of what came before it, but a lot of them to go and satisfy a lot of ESG and DEI demands from Disney and others. The lack of meritocracy and the right individuals going and handling these projects, whereas they were being watched by the majority of individuals that are aware and have an expectation of what these projects should be. And it kind of brings me back full circle to whether or not Disney ever sells Star Wars and what it could be done with it under hands that are more careful with the source material and respectful to the source material. I think George Lucas was correct at the time, handing it off to Disney. Nobody could have expected what has happened since George sold Star Wars to Disney back in 2012, and certainly with the pandemic that really dropped the Millennium Falcon fuel on the fire of so many things that have brought about the drop in quality of the content that we see today. Now, those who do really respect the Star Wars content and grew up with it, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, their products are, for the most part, pretty awesome. They're pretty great. Others that have come in and may have been mildly familiar with Star Wars didn't do such a good job. And that's unfortunate. Hopefully Disney and Lucasfilm get back to bringing in individuals who have a real investment and a true love for the franchise. And I think you can, again, see that with The Mandalorian and the majority of the directors that they use for The Mandalorian. But in the other products, not so much, and certainly not within much of what you see within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All right, next week, I will certainly be sharing with you my thoughts on the second movie in the Rebel Moon series. The Scargiver drops tomorrow. I may have to try to do a rewatch of the first one in anticipation. If you missed it, I did not enjoy the first Rebel Moon. I had high expectations for that, and unfortunately, it very much let me down. I am very interested, though, to see how the next Rebel Moon and Zack Snyder's film turns out. Hopefully, it's better than the first, and I think I have some time today, depending on how long it takes me to get my next podcast done, to go and watch the first Rebel Moon to get myself ready for it. And maybe I'll have a difference of opinion watching the first one a second time around. Before I let you go, I hope you'll take an opportunity and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. Speaking of genres, I think I was talking about that a bit before. I was in the Acolyte story that we had. When I wrote my series, originally I wrote book one to be a love letter and homage to the genres that I love. So book one in the EMBARK series really is this combination of an apocalyptic survival adventure that turns into an epic space opera. After writing that book and enjoying writing that book as much as I did, I decided to go ahead and create a trilogy, which ended up turning into creating a side story that became a link for the second trilogy. When I wrote these stories, I intended to make them all as different as I could. So you got something new in terms of the themes of each story. So whereas EMBARK Book 1 is this this post-apocalyptic space opera adventure, when you get into Book 2 and the rest of the series, they turn more into your typical space adventure in terms of what you would expect from a space opera. Book 2 in the series, Treasure in Darkness, is a heist adventure. When you get into Book 3, it is the finale of the opening trilogy. It's a political thriller space opera without the politics. There's an undertone of politics in it without ever really diving in fully into politics. And I know that's a bit hard to explain, but I really wanted to create something that was akin to, say, what you get in The Hunt for Red October. That's a techno thriller, but it's got an undertone of politics in it that doesn't go and bog the story down, and that's what I wanted to create in The Vanishing War, Book 3. Book 4 is the next book in the series, but really stands on its own, and it's pretty simple. It's a humorous space opera buddy survival adventure with Corbijn and his sarcastic AI bot, ALX-B, or Alex. When you get into Book 4 in the series, which is one of my favorites, that would be The Rocket Queen. This is a space opera that is set straight up in a post-apocalyptic Disneyland. A big portion of the story takes place inside Disneyland after the world has gone through its apocalypse, where the park ended up staying relatively intact and survivors are living inside the park. That's an idea that I had early on when I wrote EMBARK Book 1 that I saved for Book 4. When you get into Book 5. When you get into Book 6, also one of my favorites in the series, and this would be Fear the Dangerous Night. It's a space opera noir mystery that will really have you guessing until the end of the film. Closest aligned with Blade Runner, but with a lot more action to it in terms of being that noir type mystery. And then when you get to the final book in the series, Battle Planet, it's an epic space opera with honestly more action than a Michael Bay film. And a book that I'm incredibly proud of. So I hope you'll take the opportunity, if you haven't already, and go and check out the series. It's available in ebook, audiobook, hardcover, and paperback at Amazon.com. All the books were written for adults, but they are great for ages 11 plus. Just go out and pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. And if you want to purchase a paperback or audiobook directly from me, you can do that by simply emailing me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. For Book 1's description, the stars are within reach, as rival megacorporations D Corp and Intercon have made interstellar travel possible and space flight available to the masses. But when an industrial accident inside D Corp sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, all of Earth is at risk. Unaware of the disaster, Taft agrees to help fellow pilot Keith Amaro investigate a cryptic message she suddenly received from her aerospace engineer father, who died 1 year earlier. As the ruthless Sin Argum of D Corp attempts to exploit the disaster, Taft and Keitha make a shocking discovery that may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from the tyranny of D Corp's evil leader. Listen, if you like your science fiction to be adventurous, epic, filled with romance and a lot of really cool tech, EMBARK is perfect for you or the sci-fi reader, family member, or friend or child in your life. Again, head on over to Amazon.com, search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, to pick out your preferred copy, or go to mynerdworld.net. As always, thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. I'll be back next week with my thoughts on Rebel Moon, the second movie. That would be Scargiver, and any Star Wars news that breaks between now and then. Wherever you are, I hope you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you then. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.